Hello, hi everyone.
Well,
Hi.
Okay, so we're just going to wait for everyone to arrive. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We're just waiting for everyone to arrive and then we'll get started in a few minutes. Hi everyone. Just waiting a couple of minutes just while everyone arrives. Get started in a second.
Hello.
Hi Carolina.
Hi.
Right, I think the attendees numbers are kind of sitting out now, so I think everyone's here who's going to join us. So hi everyone, thanks for coming along today. So just to kind of introduce who's here with us this evening. So there's myself, so I'm Alix Taylor, I'm the BFI Network Talent Exec in the Southwest, and I work with my colleague Alice, if you'd like to just give us a wave. Alice Cabanas is the other Talent Executive in the Southwest. We've also got Thomas Wightman, who is the Talent Exec for the Southeast. Give us a wave, Tom, thanks. And then we've also got two filmmakers with us here this evening who have been part of our funding or kind of been backed by our funding schemes previously. So we've got David Drake, give us a wave, David, who's from the Southeast, and Carolina Petro from our Southwest cohort. Hi, Carolina. Cool. So we're here today really just to talk through the different funding options that are available through BFI Network during our most recent call out. So we've got two funding schemes that are available. There's the Short Film Fund, the Early Development Fund. So the structure of this is that we're, oh, hold on, Gemma, let me see if I can get that so you can see everyone. Gallery. Does that work, Gemma? Maybe hopefully everyone can see us all now. Sounds like it's just doing speaker view. Brilliant. Great. So the structure of the evening will be is that I'm going to do a short introduction, just talk through the funds, just so everyone kind of understands what we're talking about when we're referencing these different funds. And then from there, we're going to go into a Q&A and have a chat with both David and Carolina about their different experiences of the two different schemes that we offer through Network, and kind of get a bit of insight in terms of how they found that experience and any kind of takeaways they have in terms of putting in an application and how they found that process. And then afterwards, we're going to leave quite a big gap for questions at the end. So I'm going to leave at least kind of 40 to 30 minutes for that. So please make sure you get any of your questions in to us. You can ask to any of the talent execs or any of the filmmakers involved in the panel any of the questions. If you just make sure that you pop them into the Q&A function. So if you just pop them into that, so you should see that on your bottom bar, and there should be a little Q&A function. So you can just pop your questions in there to us. Please try and use that function rather than the chat, just because we'll find that easier to follow, and we can make sure we get through as many as possible. So to just let you know, we're recording this event just to allow us to be able to share this afterwards. Hopefully we won't mention anyone's name in terms of when we're actually reading out questions from people, so hopefully you should remain anonymous. Also, just to let you know, if anyone needs live streaming service, that's just available in the top left hand corner. You can view the live stream there if anyone needs it. Great. Right, I'm going to get started and talk about the funds. So I'm just going to open my screen share with a little quick presentation. Just give me one moment. Great. So BFI Network, we really exist as the talent development arm of BFI. We're really here to help find, develop and kind of grow filmmaking talent within the regions. The two schemes that we're going to be talking about today are open to England-based filmmakers. So you may be based in the Southwest, Southeast, London, the North. What we'll do is we'll pop in the chat the link through to the map, which kind of defines the different regions in terms of where you would be applying for and which hub you would need to get in touch with if you wanted to kind of ask any further questions. But just so you're aware that we are specifically looking at England-based writers and directors for these funds. So the first one I'm going to talk through is the short film funding. So this is usually the first kind of point of contact people will have with us through our funding schemes. And the short film funding is here to support short film projects that are narrative projects, so fictional, scripted projects. Unfortunately, we don't support documentary. Any documentary-based shorts would need to go through Doc Society, so we can provide some links through to them. So we only support scripted work. They can be of any genre, kind of in terms of what you're putting in. We do ask that they are drama specific, and I would really refer to people to our kind of BFI's funding priorities in terms of what we're looking for. What I would say is that we don't fund kind of straight up genre work. So for example, if you've got a kind of sci-fi project or a horror project, we would like to see something that feels kind of surprising and different in the way that it treats the genre. So it would need to use the conventions of the genre in a different way. Really, we want to see kind of character focus, kind of centered work, and stuff, real sort of dramatic tension that we can kind of get our teeth into. The pots that we have available are up to £15,000 you can apply for. Now, just to flag immediately that we typically don't fund projects at the maximum, the 15,000. This really is a kind of varying scale. So we can fund projects come for much lower amounts as well. So we really do sort of encourage people to kind of think across that as a funding kind of bracket, rather than necessarily just immediately coming to us for the full amount. We all in every region have a pot of money which we then have to distribute, and obviously the more people that ask us for that kind of full amount, the less projects we're able to fund and the less talent we're able to support. So we do encourage people to kind of make sure that you are able to kind of accommodate everything that you need within the budget, but ultimately we want to kind of hopefully see projects from a range of different budget levels. We'll talk a little bit later as well about kind of co-financing and match funding and how you might approach us with that, but I'll kind of go into that in a bit later. So the project should be up to 15 minutes. We welcome really short projects as well. So if you've got scripts that are like 5 minutes long, kind of much shorter, that's absolutely fine, just as long as it's still kind of able to be dramatic in the way that it presents the story. So like I say, England-based directors, we will kind of link through to that. We do expect there to be kind of a full filmmaking team attached. So we would expect there to be a writer director and a producer attached. It could be that the writer and the producer live outside of could live in different regions to the region that you're applying to, or it could be that they are based in other parts of the UK outside of England. But ultimately it's the director that we will decide where the application goes. So if you are a director who is living in Birmingham, for example, then you are going to end up applying to the Midlands hub on the basis that the director is from that region, and that's how we distribute those applications in terms of who assesses them and who's across them. You have to have a producer attached. So the producer is actually going to be the person who will put the application in. I definitely sort of encourage people to kind of start that process really early on. There are quite a few of different sort of networking events and things in place to allow people to meet producers. We understand it can be quite difficult and kind of a bit of a challenge in terms of finding producers, and it's one of the kind of biggest asks we have in terms of people approaching us. But I would say that it's a really important part of the kind of stepping up to a professional level with your work and kind of being able to separate yourself, because often talent will be working across all of those three roles up until, you know, kind of doing their own work. And we really want to just sort of distinguish this as separate roles as part of this funding. There is an expectation that people have some kind of formal track record in terms of their sort of creative endeavors. Now, this could be that you have done some kind of really micro budget work, or you've self-funded some work, or done some no budget films previously, some student films, or that you potentially have a sort of great track record already in another field. So maybe you're working in theatre, maybe you're doing visual arts, maybe you're working in different other capacities, but you feel you can transfer some of those skills across to the writer-director role. What I would say is that what we want to see in those is I guess a real drive to make work. We want people to be kind of putting themselves out there, creating content, and kind of giving us a bit of a sense of who they are, what their voice is, and allowing us to see how they would want to move forward. I think that what we hope the BFI network is able to do is to give people enough budget to create what would be more of a kind of calling card short film, or a kind of next step up from the work that they've been doing up until this stage. So it really allow them to kind of focus everything they've learned from their previous work to create something that really hopefully will help kind of platform them and take them to the next stage. So the deadline for this fund is coming up on the 7th of June. It's the same deadline for both of the funds currently. However, the short film funding does run twice a year. So if you don't kind of get your application quite together for this round, there will be another round that will open up soon. It's going to be in sort of I think it's around September time. So if anyone wants to kind of come back, or is just kind of thinking about developing an idea at the moment, then that will be when the next round will open. So like I say, 2 call outs twice a year. So on top of this as well, if you're a bit unsure about whether BFI Network is the right place for you to go with your short, I think that we always recommend that people just go away and watch a lot of the BFI Network funded shorts. They're available on the BFI Network website, and they're a really good place to just kind of get a sense of the type of work that we fund, things that we're interested in. I wouldn't say there's specifically issues or things that we particularly focus on, but I would say it's more around the kind of ability to storytell, and anything that you're sort of trying to get across in the work feels kind of current and progressive, and something that's kind of culturally relevant at the moment. And that's kind of what we're looking for. Alice and Tom, did you guys have anything to add at this point in terms of the short film fund that you feel would be sort of relevant to pop in? Sort of jump straight onto earlier.
Not really. I think you covered it. I think definitely watching what we funded, and you can also read up about the latest batch of films that we've just funded in the Southwest. That will kind of, again, give you an overview of what's coming up, and another insight into what we funded. We'll put the link in the chat to that so you can read about our latest cohort. I think the Southeast do something similar, so we can put in some links there as well.
So I'll just chat through briefly around co-productions in the context of short film funding. So this has slightly changed in terms of the way that, because of the way that we assess now, and because we're a public funded body and the money that we're giving out is lottery money, there is an expectation that people will come with match funding attached to the project, and that there isn't a gap in finance when it comes to us. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have all of your any sort of match funding up front in terms of your application, but we do have a set deadline where we're expecting you to raise any of that additional finance by. That additional finance amount, so for this round, let's say you put an application in for the 7th of June, we would expect you to have raised any of that additional match finance by the 16th of August. So it's worth being aware of that already, and already having those conversations. So if you're starting a crowdfunder, or you're kind of having conversations with other funding bodies, then you'll want to have that in place by then, and we've already completed your crowdfunder or done anything else that you need to do in order to do that. That's because there will be an expectation, if the project is taken forward, that you will need to demonstrate that you have that funding, that cash in the bank, so to speak, in terms of the other money. So if anyone kind of wants a bit more detail, there is quite a lot in the guidelines about that, and we do have a separate guidance on the kind of co-funding and what that looks like. Typically that will happen on budgets kind of above the 15,000, and obviously if you come in with some match funding, wherever that may be from, then it reduces the amount you need to ask from us. So obviously that in some instances might be helpful in terms of the sort of you're not having to ask us for the full amount because of that, and it obviously might help you then produce a more ambitious piece. But I would say that you don't have to come with match funding. That's not a requirement. You can just ask for the full financing from us, but just something to be aware of. So early development. So early development is quite a different caliphate in terms of the way that this works. So early development is basically the stage before you would move on to the main film fund. So the main film fund still hold two pots. They hold the pots for the main development fund, which is there to take you from for a feature film idea and to take it from a sort of stage of an outline or treatment through to the script, to pre-production and kind of being ready to go. The production fund is actually to produce production costs for a feature film. So similarly to shorts, those types of projects that are backed are always scripted content. They have very similar requirements. They have to hit the same sort of funding priorities, and there's definitely obviously a sort of trajectory usually that's sort of anticipated when you're kind of coming through, and it's great if people obviously kind of want to maybe start that process. Maybe you've done quite a few shorts, maybe you're at a stage now where you're kind of being recognized for your shorts, or maybe have a creative track record or a career in kind of writing for theatre or writing novels or kind of other areas, and you want to transfer that now and you want to move on to feature. Then early development is quite a good space in between that and the main development fund, and it's really there to help you take a sort of central idea for a feature film through to a treatment or an outline. So it's with your kind of really early stages of an idea and you're kind of trying to shape the story, trying to get it into a position where you could then take a treatment to potential producers or funders to actually get the main development support. And ultimately as well, it could, if you did decide then to take it to the main development fund, you could use the treatment as part of that application process to the main development fund. So it's only quite small pots of money in the sense that it is basically a fee for a writer for their time. So it would be, again, an England-based writer, and you would work with whichever hub you were based within. So you'd work directly with your talent exec and kind of grow that. And kind of develop, you would spend usually about 3 months kind of going back and forward, developing it, doing slightly longer drafts of the treatment until it's around a 5-10 page document. There are also other costs that you can ask for as part of that process. Some of those may be things like if you had some costs against kind of doing some research, if it was potentially a historical piece or something where you really felt that you wanted to kind of go into some detail, you could do that there. There's also the sort of opportunity to do things, for example, if you wanted to take a photographer to a location, kind of get some visuals, use a graphic designer to kind of create some visuals to sit on the treatment, other things like that are possible too. So you can literally just come as a writer. You don't need to have a producer attached to the project at this stage. You don't need to have a director attached. There is the option to attach both and bring them with you if you just happen to already be working with them and have them attached to the project, but there is absolutely no sort of expectation that you are coming with them on board. There are kind of really small minimal fees that could be attached to a director role or producer role at that stage, but again, they're very small amounts because we don't expect large input from them at that point. Like I say, that you would need to be at a stage where you could seriously be considering kind of moving into feature. So there's an expectation that you may have already been able to kind of reach out to the industry in the sense that you are sort of being recognised for a series of shorts or other kind of critically well received work. So by that we mean that you may have had a really strong festival run with a short film, and you're starting to get some recognition, maybe have won some awards for your shorts, or similarly in a different field. That's the sort of level of where we would expect people to come at. So yeah, that's kind of a very different process, and really there often we see people go through a short film funding who then move on to early development, or often sometimes people will come, like I say, from different areas of the industry into the early development stage. Alice and Tom, did you have anything to sort of add to that early development?
No, that sounds good. Everything you said sounds spot on.
Nothing from me other than, interestingly, I think both speakers here today have been through or are going through both. So there might be something interesting there in the conversation that we can discuss.
Brilliant. Great. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. I don't use that anymore. Great. So I think now's a good opportunity for us to kind of have a chat with the filmmakers who are here with us. And I think that they can kind of explore a little bit and tell you a bit more about their experience, and then we'll go on to questions. Tom and David, are you happy to kind of go first and talk a little bit around
funding? Sure. Hi, everybody. Hi, David. How are you doing?
Good. Not bad.
Good. So David's in kind of like well, I'll let him explain, but David's been sort of double funded by us. He's kind of a unique position to kind of talk about his experience. And I was trying to think of kind of things that would be useful for people to know rather than just kind of like what you've done and everything. But is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew kind of at the start of the process of making your films, or is there anything kind of you sort of words of wisdom that you would sort of pass on to people that are looking to apply?
Yeah, I guess with the short film fund, the application, it was I had written the script and everything, because we kind of did things backwards, didn't we? So I had done the early development fund first, and then the next year I was going to go for the short film fund, and I didn't have any producer or anything. So at that stage, I was kind of already kind of like I had written the script partially already before I got a producer on board. So I think in the like if I were to do it again, I would want a producer from the start, because of, working with them on the development of it is really important. So like I already done a number of drafts, and then once Ludovico came on board, it was, redoing a lot of that work already that I thought was finished, and doing it again, and trying to really sort of make the best script as possible before putting it through with the application. So that's one thing that I thought was really important, is finding somebody that I gelled with, who was a producer that I could work well with. And that's something I would have probably gotten to earlier if I were to do it again.
And I can't remember now, but when you applied for the short film funding, what information, apart from the budget and your script, what other bits of detail did you include in your application?
Well, so I included some of my work as a photographer. So I come from a photography background. I had done a number of DIY sort of short films over the years as well. So I'd done about 3 or 4 short films. I think I probably included those in my application. But then I also, I come from a background where I shot a lot of album covers and stuff for record labels. So I included my portfolio of that type of work as well, just to show the visual background. And then I had also designed a quite a big sort of visual sort of, I guess, pitch deck, or like treatment, I guess. So like sort of just a PDF, but a lot of imagery in it that I had made, or had taken from mood boards, and sort of designed this sort of fairly long, it took a long time, pitch deck as part of the application as well, which I thought was a really helpful way to show how I was visualizing it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember it, thinking about it now. I think because a lot of people who apply for the short film fund never include kind of any visual material at all, which always seems a little bit strange, because it's, especially if someone hasn't made a lot of work previously, it really kind of helps the assessors when they're looking at it, in terms of like getting a real kind of sense of sort of aesthetically how it's all going to look.
It helped me as well putting it together. So it helped me kind of get a better sense of how I wanted it to visually look as well. And I had to kind of think like, oh, how do I practically do this? And me and Ludovico were able to talk about like, are we going to do a set build? Are we going to do this? All because of the visual document kind of helped clue us up on what we had to think about.
And obviously, COVID has caused a lot of delays for everything, but can you talk a little bit about kind of the time from once you were funded and kind of the process after that up until production, sort of how long it sort of took you?
Okay, so I think, if I remember correctly, because my timelines are all thrown out now because of COVID, but I think I was writing Leftover which is the short film. I was writing that in 2019. From quite early in 2019, I started to write that. And then I got with the producer to sort of rework it and stuff, probably in the summer of 2019. And then we made our application, I think in the maybe mid-autumn 2019. And then I think we found out early 2020, before COVID like really struck the UK, that we were successful in our application. But then obviously there was no way we were going to shoot. So then we ended up shooting in September of 2020. So it was quite a year and a half maybe process from start to, well, it's not, I mean, finish is sort of a nebulous term, I guess, but
Yeah.
delivery items are still coming, Tom. But yeah, like it's a long haul, I guess. You have to kind of think, a year or two out when you're thinking of that.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously isn't standard. I mean, because COVID kind of caused a lot of delays for so many options. Could you talk a little bit about, once you were funded, what kind of sort of additional support you received to help you make your film?
Yeah, well, we did receive quite a lot of help, especially with COVID sort of related stuff. So we were taking, COVID sort of courses. A couple of our, our production manager and our producer took that in order to get up to snuff with that sort of stuff. And we received some additional COVID related, I think, sort of financial relief on the project as well, in order to make sure we could cope with the additional costs that were incurred by that for testing of our actors, and so everybody could have PPE and things like that. And that was like really vital in preparation for the shoot. So yeah, that was super helpful. I'm trying to think what else there was. I mean, obviously in terms of notes on the script and things like that, I mean, that you gave me were incredibly helpful as well. And that yeah, so that was all all really helpful. And I think, yeah, shaping all that, that a lot of that sort of assistance came from you guys. So that was really, really uber important for us.
Is there anything that you didn't receive that you think would be a really good thing for people to have, even prior to application or during the process of making their film?
During the process of making their film, that's an open-ended question there. I think maybe after the making of the film, I have something. It's like the festival run is like really difficult to strategize and figure out. And I know this is kind of like the end part of the process, but I think, yeah, getting some help to understand that would be great. I mean, we've had conversations about it and that were very useful. And but I think obviously understanding maybe a bit more of the strategizing and how that stuff works would be super helpful.
And can you talk a little bit about, kind of from having made your short, like what you're up to now, like what you're up to next?
Well, so at the moment, during COVID, I wrote a feature, and that got picked up by a production company. So obviously we're doing our festival run with the short now and submitting that, but then I'm also kind of gearing up for a feature. We've got a distributor attached, sales agent, and it's set in the States, much like the short film is. So we shot Leftover in London, or set just outside London, I guess. But it's set in New York, where I'm from. And the feature is also set in the States. So we're kind of like gearing up over here with my UK-based producers to then shoot over there. So we're kind of going through all that right now, and it's kind of a bit of a head spin, but it's really exciting as well.
Can you, just because one of the biggest things that is quite problematic is obviously people need to have a producer attached to the short film. Can you talk a little bit about how you found your producer, or the process that you went through to kind of find the right person for your project?
So yeah, I mean, I did a lot of meetings. So I'm based up in Norwich, and all the producers I were talking to were based in London. So I was doing a lot of trips out of pocket down to London to meet with producers, just because I really wanted to make sure I met the right person. I did phone calls first, obviously, but then, went down to meet people face to face, just because you want to make sure you really gel with the person. So I probably met upwards of 10, 11 producers before I settled on actually, I had settled on somebody and then moved on from them before I found Ludovico. So I had settled on somebody that I thought I was getting on with, but then we both kind of mutually agreed that we are not into the same type of movies or same direction with stuff. And we kind of amicably sort of went separate directions. And the way I found people, I was reaching out to people that I found via the NFTS sort of website. So alumni from there, I was kind of looking them up on IMDb. I was reaching out to people that had made other short films that were playing at festivals, people who make music videos who I figured might be wanting to move into shorts. Tom, you introduced me to a couple people as well, and I met with them. And yeah, so I met with quite a few before I met Ludovico, who I ended up making the short with. And I also met the two producers who ended up commissioning me to write the feature during COVID. So I met them during this whole process as well. And then they ended up working with me on this film that I'm now kind of making.
Great. How are we doing for time? Are we okay to carry on? Would you want to?
Yeah, I think give it another couple more minutes.
Okay.
4 minutes.
Cool.
No.
Yeah, David, sorry, just could you talk a little bit about what your film is about and kind of like the story behind making your film?
Sure. So it's kind of a personal sort of story, based. It's sort of about a woman in her mid-20s dealing with the death of her father, who's an addict. So it's about her sort of having to deal with the practical aspects of sort of clearing out his house, but it's told non-linearly, so it's sort of intercut with memories that are triggered by things that she's seen in the house, of sort of their tumultuous sort of relationship, but like it's also a loving relationship. So it's sort of this up and down sort of movie in terms of the emotional sort of roller coaster of it. But yeah, it comes from personal experiences of myself dealing with a parent who died of addiction and stuff. So it's about that. And you know, I kind of had to dig kind of deep into personal sort of trauma to write it, but and then to share it with everybody on the crew, like, oh, this is how it went. And so it's kind of bleak when you kind of dig into it, but then it was also really cathartic to step into this set that we built that's totally based on my dad's house. And like it was really strange because my brother was there too, because he lives over here in the UK and he's my DIT on it and my editor. And it was really cathartic for both of us to sort of sit there and like we're sitting there in our childhood sort of looking around the place and we're like, wow, this is crazy. But it was that's the movie magic of it, I guess. And we loved making it, and it was a great experience all the way through. And everybody who was working on it with us was just incredible. Loads of really great people that we met through the whole process.
Yeah, and you managed to get a pretty amazing cast for the film, which is,
we were really fortunate. Yeah. So we got a casting director named Carmel Cochran, who she's doing all of Robert Eggers' films. So she did The Witch, and she did The Lighthouse, and she did Saint Maud recently. And she responded to the script because she had a similar background to me. And so she decided to work with us. And she got us Chloe Peary, who was in The Queen's Gambit recently. And then Ian Hart, obviously, who was in God's Own Country and in the Harry Potter movies. So yeah, we were like really fortunate to get Carmel to work with us and then convince those actors to work with us. It was really, really an amazing experience.
Do you think, like, when putting together your budget now, having that money set aside for the casting director was probably one of the kind of most important things that you did in the end?
Oh, totally. I mean, all my previous shorts I had done through sort of street casting. People I knew, everybody was a first-time actor when I work with them typically. So this time I was like, oh, I'll do that again. But then I kind of, you advised me not to do it that way. And then Ludovico had said, let's go to a casting director as well. So we reached out to a few, but Carmel sort of got back to us. And that was super important, I think, because working with professional actors has made me feel now more comfortable about doing this feature where I'll be working with professional actors and going through that whole process, talking to them ahead of time and going through the script with them and changing and adapting the dialogue to work with them. That was super important, I think. And I would definitely recommend going that route if you can.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we see kind of a huge difference, just not only in terms of the logistics, in terms of setting up films, but just helps just a higher quality of kind of actor coming through, and lots
100%.
of you feel like street casting and casting online, it's still
Street casting is great as well, and if you have like a bigger cast, then that totally makes sense. But I think for key roles, if you can, and if you like that sort of, that way, I mean, I really enjoyed working with professional actors. It kind of opened my eyes quite a bit.
Were you daunted working with them, or how did you feel?
Oh, absolutely. I was terrified. So absolutely terrified, because obviously I'd watched their movies well in advance as well, and Chloe is such an incredible sort of performer, like, and so is Ian obviously as well, but Ian was there for one day. Chloe was there for 3 days, and yeah, Chloe is just an amazing performer, and I'd be like, okay, let's do like a little rehearsal, and then she'd be like, no, let's go straight into it, and she would just like level me with her performance, and I was like, holy shit. So she was just yeah, I mean, that was really something else working with them, and I was terrified to give notes at first, but then they were so like open to it that I got comfortable, and it was a really good learning experience.
Great. No, I'm pleased to see you've done so well. Should we move on to Carolina, or do we still have a bit more time?
Yeah, I think if we move on to Carolina, that's okay, and then we can always come back if we have a bit of time at the end.
No, of course. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone, and hi, Carolina. Thanks for joining us. Interestingly, Carolina's had a sort of similarly ordered journey through the funds, which isn't that typical, in that we're going to speak about your early development fund application, which you did first, and Carolina's also just about to shoot her BFI Network funded short film, which was put on hold due to COVID. So you have sort of gone through the fund in the same way. So yeah, we're going to focus on your early development funding application. So I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about the application and what the story's about.
Yes, so it wasn't planned. It sort of happened out of the a kind of disappointment after I got funding from the BFI to do the short in 2019, at the end of 2019. And we were going to shoot in March, just as the pandemic started. So it was really disappointing, and I spent a couple of weeks not really knowing what to do, because I was so looking forward to doing this short. But then there was something about the pandemic and having to sort of focus at home that gave me a kind of space to write. And I thought about a story that I had thought about before, but I managed to sort of structure it in my head, and was able to just get the momentum, using the momentum and the confidence that the funding from the short film gave me to apply for this other project. And it was great that I did that, because I was able to then use the time of not having be able to do the short to start another project. And I really got into it, and it was really great.
And can we talk a little bit about, or maybe come back to the story in a bit, can we talk about the application process and how you found that actually putting in the application for Early Development Fund?
Yes, so I was dealing with the how we were going to, when we would be able to do the short. And I asked Alix, because you had gone, if it was possible for me to do this application, and she was very helpful. She said she was going to ask for me, because she didn't know, because I had to do 2 contracts at the same time. But she very quickly came back to me and said, yes, you can do it. So as long as you finish it before we start doing the short, then you can do it. And so I wrote the application, and yeah, I guess it was a lot easier than the short, because I didn't have to have a producer, which I think is one of the hardest things, and because it's much shorter. So I think the this application was easier to do.
And so once you put in the application and you'd heard you were successful, what was the process like after that, taking the idea from, you know, the sort of step outline, if you like, that you apply with, right through to the final treatment? Can you talk to us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, sure. So it started off being maybe 20 pages, and then Alix and I worked on it by just me giving her the first draft. And very slowly we took layers off it. It at some point felt impossible for it to be 10 pages. Because there's a point in which you just don't know what to take away from it. And I think that's as a writer who's not very experienced as a writer, is very hard to kind of find the core of the story, to find the things that need to be there. And Alix was really helpful through this process, and I was able to, get it done with a lot of effort.
Would you say that was the most challenging part then, in terms of sort of stripping things away and really trying to get to the essence of the story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely, because it is hard to let go of certain things that you think are important and that you like, and that you have to completely let go of, and at the beginning it doesn't make sense, and it's hard to let go of certain things, but then once you do it and things start to take the shape that they need, then yes. But it is very difficult to find that core of the story, to stay with the character, with the main protagonist and the arc, and make it very clear. It's for me, it still is very hard.
And although it was hard, do you think it was one of the most important parts of the journey as well, or would you say it was a really important part of the journey?
Yeah, no, I think it is the most important of the journey, from all kinds of different aspects. But as a writer, as a director, even, you know, once you really identify what the core of the story is, you know, what your protagonist really wants, the through line, which is not easy to do, but once you identify that very clearly, then it continues on to really help you, even directing the actors later on and in the editing. So I think it is one of the hardest, but it's also the most satisfying.
And sort of in terms of like where you are with your career now, because a lot of the questions we get about the early development fund is, am I ready to submit? Am I at the right stage to submit? So obviously I was familiar with your work before you came in with an application. Your work sort of travelled to festivals like Encounters, Aesthetica, and has sort of picked up some awards. You graduated from the LFS as well with an MA in filmmaking. Did you feel that this fund was kind of the right thing for you at this moment in your career? Did you feel that it's, you know, it was useful for you at this sort of, you know, mid to early stage in your writing career?
Yes, absolutely. It was the most. It's just kind of changed everything for me. And I remember one thing that you told me in one of our meetings, because I'm not the most confident person in the world, and I think when I was trying to do the application, I came to you and I said, oh, I really don't know if this is going to go through, and you said something that really sticks in my mind, and I always remember, and you said, a lot of people apply without 100%. Sometimes men just do it really fast, and we women kind of think about it more and stay and hesitate, whereas why don't you just go for it, just apply and see what happens. yeah, and that just gave me that little bit of a push that I needed then. And honestly, it's like having applied for the short film and getting it gave me the impetus to keep going and feel confident about it. And it's all about just trying it out, even if you get rejected. Rejection is also important sometimes because it teaches you something about the application, and it is also very good to be able to deal with rejection in this industry. I think this is all about putting you up in a pedestal and then throwing you, and it's something you have to be able to deal with. So, you know, I was full of fear and insecurity, and it's just about letting go of those things and applying. Once you feel ready, of course, and really have your project at a stage where it's got a real structure and it's where you want it to be, then just go for it. You know, that there are people there that will help you, that will tell you this might work better, or you need to keep working on this other aspect. But just it's good to just have your work out there.
A really interesting point about confidence. And I think one of the things that I like about the fund sort of as an exec is, you know, people can come at that really early stage, and, you know, the applications don't necessarily have to be perfect. And, you know, if we see something in it, then we can like get involved and invest in people at this very early stage. So I think having that confidence to apply is important, and it's a great fund where we can sort of take some risks, and also the application is a bit more straightforward, obviously, than the production fund. So I'm glad you found the confidence to apply. Have we got time, Alix, for one more question? Or yeah, I was just wondering what tips you'd give to other writers that might be on the session at the moment that are thinking of putting in an application for early development.
Well, I think for me, it's just following a story structure. It's very important, you know, like we were saying, to know your story really well, to know what your character wants, and to have a beginning, a middle, and an end very clear, and what takes you to the end, and the end being really, really strong as the beginning. So yeah, it's just, I mean, reading screenwriting books, and I worked with Selena Okonova through a workshop that we did at the Watershed, and that really helped me a lot in understanding how to structure your story. But yeah, just write every day. And you're bound to have something really good if you do it every day, but it is an exercise of doing it all the time until it gets to that point where it feels that the elements of the story are working right.
And if we have time, just before we go over to questions, could you just very briefly tell us about the story of Choirs of Silence?
Yes, so it's also a very kind of a personal story. It started from a personal story. I am originally from Colombia, and it's a story about class division in Colombia, which is something more dramatic than it is in this country. And in Colombia, there a lot of people have maids, and so this is a story about a 12-year-old girl who has premature sexual interactions with a maid, and how she is obviously not able to understand this, what this causes to her mind, and starts acting in ways that people start judging. And so it's a reflection how society sees this kind of behavior, and a reflection on how the two classes relate to each other, the servant and the girl of the house. It started off as being a personal story, but obviously it's dramatized and developed into a much more dramatic tale.
Thank you, Carolina. I wonder if it's just worth noting, interestingly, both early development projects are not set in the UK. I don't know if that's maybe a question that's coming up, but just to sort of talk about that a little bit quickly, the guidelines cite that it has to qualify as a UK film using the British cultural test. So that's either a UK film or a UK co-production. So a lot of our films, early development projects and short film projects, will be firmly based in the UK. As long as they qualify under the British cultural test, would qualify under the British cultural test, then they can also be set elsewhere. I don't know if Tom wanted to jump in there, or if there are more questions on that, we can maybe answer in the question time.
Great. I've just popped the link to that cultural test that you were talking about, Alice, there, just in the chat, if anyone is kind of curious in terms of how that's worked out.
Yeah, I just thought it was worth flagging because of both projects, just to give everyone that information.
Great. Thanks, everyone. That was really interesting. So I'm just going to skip over now to questions from the attendees. So what I'm going to do, so there is just one question that's coming up quite a bit, so I'm just going to answer that straight out, and then the rest I'm going to ask out to the rest of the panel. So there's a couple of people that asked, in terms of applying, how many applications you can put in, depending on if you're a producer or a director or a writer. Just to clarify, as a producer, you could put in more than one project idea. What we would say is that you would have to make sure that you are able to have the capacity, so if all those projects that you were putting in were successful, that you would still be able to deliver them. So kind of submitting, you know, as many projects as you would like, but within your capacity to be able to deliver those. As a writer, you could again potentially put in more than one project. Ultimately, I think the majority of the time we work with writer directors, and I think that the focus really is on the director, in the sense that the expectation is that the director wouldn't be attached to more than one application. So if you're coming in and you want to put across different applications, as a director, you can only put in one and be attached to one. So just hopefully that sort of clears out for anyone who's sort of considering putting in more than one application. So as a producer, yes. As a director, no. As a writer, again, slightly complicated, but I would say veer against that, really. Ultimately, try and put in one project on that basis. Great. So I'm going to go through some of the questions. So the first one, I'm going to slightly sort of reword in a way, because I think it's asking a really interesting thing, but is specifically at the moment talking about comedy, but it's asking what does everyone feel about how genre-based work can come in to the fund and compete against dramas, really. So it's asking what do you feel needs to happen to sort of elevate, say, a comedy to a stage where it could compete against a kind of dramatic piece of work. I don't know if Alice or Tom, one of you might be able to maybe elaborate on that a little bit further.
I mean, comedies are like gold dust. So anyone who's got a good comedy, that's a strong comedy, has a strong chance, because we get so few, which is strange because we're in a country with such good comic TV writers, but for some reason it doesn't seem to translate into film that well. I don't know why, but yeah, I mean, comedy is something really strong. I mean, we do support quite a lot of genre within our region. We've had a lot of science fiction, a lot of horror recently, and kind of new productions that we've supported. But I think one of the sort of senior development execs at BFI said something to us really interesting a couple of years ago, that they were referencing genres, films like His House and Get Out and Us, as really good kind of examples for the types of genre that we would support, that ultimately films that sit within genre but have something ultimately to say. I think that's something kind of really important to highlight, but it's something that definitely we encourage.
Thanks for that, Tom. Also, again, a quick one that I'm just going to answer to everybody else. So someone's asking in relation to the funds, whether each region sort of have an infinite pot that we could sort of tap into for production support. What I would say is that we don't, obviously we have limited funds per region, and that's based on the kind of population of the region. I would say that, and also when it comes to that context, we also take from the short film fund, early development fund comes out of the same pot. So again, if we're funding more shorts projects, we'll fund less early development that year and vice versa. So that sort of is a sort of changeable thing, depending on each region and what we've got available to spend. But yeah. There's a question here around if someone's coming to the short film fund and they are kind of a more emerging filmmaker, they said, would potentially having a more established producer help strengthen an application, or would it weaken it because they themselves were not necessarily emerging? Tom or Alice, would either of you like to take that?
I think it is a bit of a balance. I mean, I think that it really depends on how experienced you're talking. So, you know, the fund is there to support new and emerging talent. So if it was a producer that was slightly more experienced than the writer director, you know, they had, you know, a really good batch of sort of really well respected short films under their belt, you know, and they were pushing up to their debut feature, then, but the writer and director was much newer, that would be, you know, totally fine, because we'd kind of see that producer as taking that director on their journey with them. I think if you're talking like a really experienced producer that's had some significant feature film credits, I would sort of think carefully about that. I mean, one possible way around that would be that they could have a really meaningful co-producer on board that was a sort of newer co-producer. You know, if that was your team, and if it was a very experienced producer, you could think about whether there is a less experienced co-producer that could come on to that project as well, so that we are definitely you know, supporting new talent. I'd probably maybe have a chat with your regional exec about that, if, you know, you are thinking about a very experienced producer, just so they can give you a more detailed steer. I'd sort of need to see their body of work to give you a final answer.
So I'm just going to pick out one we've got one with lots of questions in. I'm just going to pick out ones that I think are kind of most relevant. I wonder if maybe David, this is, and Carolina, both because you've been through the short film fund, when you were applying for the short film fund, maybe if you could give us a sense of the supporting materials that you attached to those applications, and kind of how much sort of time you spent on those, sort of gathering visual materials, and kind of how you kind of, yeah, approached that with your applications.
You want to go first?
Okay. So I did a video. I edited a video with specific scenes from films that I was using as reference, and I did a voiceover over it. I never tried that before, but I think it really worked, because I spoke about how that scene specifically related to what I was trying to do, and why. And I feel like using video is really helpful.
Mm.
Yeah, and just further to what I had mentioned initially is that I did a pretty detailed visual sort of like pitch deck, and you know, I did it not only for the application, but I did a version for casting as well, which didn't go with the application, and I also did a version for production design, and that's I know that's kind of like a bit of a tangent there, but like I used that sort of template to then also help get a really, you know, good casting director, and also to get a really good production designer on board, to excite them about the project and stuff. So I think that sort of visual material and trying to really think through every aspect of how you want to shoot the film. Here's some, you know, images from films that, you know, shoot in this style, or from this camera angle, or from, you know, this sort of setup and this sort of lighting, and kind of really think through all that stuff in your application. That's I think really important.
It's actually like there's an amazing resource that I didn't know about until recently, but probably everyone watching this can be like, yeah, of course we know about that, but a thing called Shot Deck, which basically you can take, it's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of films on there, and it's got loads of stills that are uploaded, it's really useful. And you can actually, through using Shot Deck, you can actually put together a kind of basically a treatment or a mood board for your film, and it's got a really wide range and eclectic mix of films. It's really really good. So I highly recommend you checking that out if you've not seen it.
Great. So just talking through maybe one for Tom or Alice here. So the application form itself, so this is in context of early development, but I think would apply to both. It says that, so they're asking in the guidelines for any links or attachments to previous work. If you've got a mixture of work, i.e. links to films you've made, but also maybe actual links to screenplays or kind of pieces of creative work, what do you think would best represent work for someone? What's the best thing to deliver in terms of those kind of past work? What would you most like to come see in those applications?
For the EDF fund?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would always sort of say to people, choose one piece of writing that you think kind of really exemplifies your kind of style as a writer, I think is really good, or one film. I think sometimes people have a tendency to kind of upload 10 different things, and some may be stronger than others, or they may be weak in certain areas. So I'd always sort of say focus on one thing if you possibly can. If you come from a different sort of creative background in terms of, not necessarily having, if you're a novelist, for example, not written a screenplay, excerpts from your book or something like that is always really useful to have a read as well. But yeah, mostly just kind of, I think kind of less is more, because we just focus on the one thing that you think is most key for us to read, really.
So there's a question here around the split between live action projects that we support and animation projects. Maybe Alice, Tom, if you're happy to maybe elaborate a bit more on kind of, any comments you want to have about that.
I mean, we are really open to animation projects. I think we haven't funded as many as we would like, in all honesty, and we get a much higher proportion of applications from live action projects. Tom will tell you if that's the same in the southeast, but certainly in the southwest, we have funded one animation short so far. We are really hoping to fund more. So I don't sort of have any stats to split it, but it is very heavily weighted. I mean, the applications are heavily weighted on live action, therefore the funded films are heavily weighted on live action, but that is, we would welcome more animation applications. Yeah. I think the challenge with animations, they're much more expensive by their very nature. So we would be open to much shorter animations. We sort of would think it would probably be unrealistic for a 15-minute application to come to us for 15K, and we'd question that. So yeah, any animators out there thinking of applying, especially in the southwest, we're really open to that, and we would like to be having more coming through.
Yeah, I agree. We've had Sport 2 in the last 3 years. I don't know why the fund doesn't attract more animators, or people aren't aware that they can do something that we need to do some work on. But yeah, completely concur with that. We'd love to see more animations come forward.
Ours was like I think it ended up being 3 or 4 minutes in the end. It's just finishing at the moment. So, you really can come with a really, nice punchy short animation application.
Someone's also asking as well whether the early dev fund is open to animation, which it also is open to animation. Yeah, absolutely. There's a question here around the sort of percent, again, another sort of split question. I think trying to gauge the likelihood of being supported as an individual writer on a early development project without having a producer or director attached, and whether you tend to get more applications from just individual writers on their own without a team attached, or if it's the other way around in the context of early development.
We mostly had writer directors come forward by themselves, and then like with David is kind of a good example, through funding him to write his tune, and then encouraging them to try and find their team, so their producer, and obviously David's director as well, but then obviously finding their director they want to work with. So someone we're working with now, she's a writer, novelist, previously writing a screenplay, and she, through writing this process, found her director, found her producer. So that's completely fine if you're a writer by yourself, completely.
Yeah, just picking up on that, we would never base the decision on the makeup of that team. It would be on the idea. So, you know, an application where there is a producer and a director wouldn't necessarily hold more weight than where it was just a writer. For us, it really is about that idea. We're very happy with solo writers or fuller teams.
There's a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions. So we'll try and get through as many of these as we can.
Yeah.
Just to kind of give you a sense. So I think you sort of answered this, David, in your question around how you found your producer. So I won't go into any more detail around that. There is someone asking, though, whether you are happy to talk around your budget and whether you can tell us kind of around the budget amount that you asked from BFI and whether you had any match funding attached to that at all.
So we went for the full 15,000. And we also, because we knew at the time we had thought we were going to build a set to make it look like it was in New York. But even with that full 15,000, it just wasn't going to be possible for us. So we did end up going for a location, but we did end up getting some additional funding for post-production because we kind of started to run out afterwards. And yeah, we did get that, and that is actually coming from ourselves. So because we started to run out afterwards, and myself and Ludovico really got on super well in making the film. So we actually formed a production company together, and then we put money from that into the project afterwards to try to get it through the rest of post-production, just because we had, I guess, underestimated some of our, budget sort of costs and stuff like that, as we were kind of noobs at it. So yeah, it was a learning experience. But we ended up putting not much, but just a little bit to push us over where we needed to be, and especially put it towards festival submissions and stuff like that as well afterwards.
There's quite a few people asking whether they can apply as a co-writer to either of the funds. That's absolutely fine to apply as a co-writer. I would say for early development, you would then have to split that fee. So that £1,000 total fee would then be split between the co-writers. So just to kind of make that clear, it's an easy one to get out of the way. So then we've got a few questions around, I think, kind of whether we accept work that is a bit more experimental, that kind of doesn't sit within the sort of narrative form. Maybe ask Tom, you can sort of give a sense of where our role ends with experimental and where narrative sort of begins from a BFI's point of view.
It's a really tricky one. I was talking to a filmmaker earlier who wants to come forward with kind of more from an artistic background. We really want to support artists to make films for sure, and totally open to people who've come from visual art, moving image, or different moving image backgrounds. But fundamentally, it's always kind of based on the script, and as long as the script is a story, essentially, then it's completely fine. As experimental as your previous work has been, or as experimental as you tend for it to be visually, as long as there's fundamentally a story and there's a character's drama, basic stuff like that, then yeah, that's totally fine from our perspective.
There's a question here around the stage that the script was at when it gets submitted to the Short Film Fund. They're asking whether it can be in kind of first stage, early draft when it's submitted. Maybe Alice and Tom, you might be able to just elaborate on kind of what stage we usually expect draft scripts to come in.
For the short, well, obviously for the short film fund, yeah. I mean, you really need to be happy with it. You need to feel confident that it is as close to the film that you want to make. We would, with it varies really. Sometimes we'll have projects come in that we'll fund, and then we'll get involved with a bit more script development work after funding. We want to support the project, but we feel it needs a little bit more work to get ready to shoot. So that can happen sometimes. Sometimes films can come in and it can be just a a couple of rounds of notes between the talent exec and the team, you know, when they're a bit further along and we feel that's all that's needed. But you have to, you know, you have to remember your the script is a really important part of the application, and it's going to be assessed against all of those other scripts that have been applied with. So whilst it's absolutely fine for it not to be a final draft, you know, and for you to want to maybe do a bit more work on it, and you can sometimes put that in your application if you know, if the ending's bugging you, or you know there's something not quite working, you know, you put that, an element of awareness about that in an application can be, you know, can be quite interesting as an exec if you're assessing something and they're on this, you know, the applicant is on the same page about the areas that might need some work, so that's fine. But I wouldn't apply with a script that was really early stage that still needs a lot more work. I think because the funds are becoming more competitive now, you need to feel relatively confident that it shows your strength as a writer and that it really conveys your film in the best light. Tom, I don't know if you'd agree.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, totally. And also, I mean, we spoke about this a little bit about kind of like supporting materials. If you've made a film previously that you're not that happy with, but it's maybe the only thing that you've applied with, it's also quite useful to include some information, just kind of talking a little bit about that as well, to kind of get a sense of kind of, you can see where things went wrong. It's you know, we've had often kind of filmmakers ask me like, I've made this film but I don't think it's very good, but it's the only thing I've done, shall I put it through? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. It's always good to kind of have awareness of your work previously and where it could be improved on.
There's a question here around whether either sort of independent freelance producers can apply, or whether they can instead actually be through an established sort of production company. Be good to kind of get your sense on that, Alice, just in terms of what it means to apply either with a freelance producer or with a production company.
Yeah, sure. So in order for a film to be awarded funding and to get through the contracting process, there will need to be a production company set up, as it will need to be associated with a production company. There can be, you know, the producer applying could be a freelance producer that is then a producer for hire on the production company that actually produces the work. But if you are a sort of completely new producer with no production company, you might find it difficult to get through the contracting stage unless you're willing to set up a production company at that point. So the answer is it is open to all. It is open to freelance producers and it is open to production companies, but that production company would need to be on board and established in order for the application to progress further.
There's a question here around the diversity application part of the process for early development, because there's, I think, part of the section where they ask us to sort of ask anyone who's applying to sort of give an indication of how they plan to sort of diversely hire crew, especially like heads of department and things like that. They're just sort of asking, I guess, at that stage of application, what is sort of expected and in where they will kind of know where the production is at currently. So I guess this is probably maybe talking around the idea of what it means to talk about around the diversity of who is actually applying and who's part of the team currently. I don't know if you've got any advice on that at all.
Is that for early development?
Yeah. So they won't necessarily know who the heads of department are yet and things like that, but
no.
Kind of, yeah.
You wouldn't. So I think for that, you know, we would be primarily assessing on the diversity criteria that was relevant to that application. So it would be, you know, the story, the characters, the way you know, those characters are presented, and the talent behind the application. So that would be the writer or writer, producer, director, if there is a producer and director attached at that point. If you are going to direct that and you have a really good sense of who your HODs would be and you feel comfortable putting that in, you know, you could add that in, but I don't think it would be expected from my point of view at that point, unless you were quite far down that road, which you probably wouldn't be for early development. But Tom, would you expect that for early development?
I mean, I was just thinking, I'm pleased you took that question, because I was trying to think how I'd answer it.
I guess if you were a super small, like it was a really small indie, small like low budget feature, and you know who your DOP is going to be for it because you've worked with them, you know, all the way through, and you're definitely going to direct it, and you want to put something in there about how that fits with the diversity standards, and you'd be welcome to. But I think I think if you haven't thought that far ahead or are not at that point, you don't need to put that into your application.
No,
Yeah,
no, that's fine.
Yeah, I know, I'd agree. And I think as well, just focus on the diversity, I guess, within the story itself, or kind of on screen, that you're kind of currently planning at this stage, because I think that's all you can kind of reasonably talk about. Right. So it'd be good to find a little bit about, so there's a couple of questions around sustainability. I think both as a kind of idea to explore within a story, and whether that's something that BFI is looking for in terms of our applications, but also around the actual process of going through the Albert calculator and what that means, and how much of that work that we need to do on shorts as the producer. So I wondered, maybe Alix, Tom, you might be able to talk a little bit around it as a kind of theme or an area to explore as a story. And then maybe David and Carolina, you're just starting to obviously go through that process with the short film fund with the Albert calculator. Maybe if you've had any kind of experience of how you've tried to keep your carbon footprint down on set, that you might be able to share with us.
I mean, I think it's kind of a relatively quite new thing. I think it was only sort of like brought into our application maybe sort of like a year ago. So I think we're only starting to see kind of teams think about it now with like our new cohort and films that have been kind of backed up due to COVID. I think it's an interesting thing to kind of think about. It's not something that I sadly hadn't really kind of considered greatly until it was something that was kind of brought forward to us about what teams can do. But it's definitely something that teams can certainly think about from a very basic kind of level, in terms of reducing the travel distance from where you're living, and other small things you can implement in terms of your crew and working together. But I think it's kind of I don't feel fully qualified to kind of answer that yet, because it's still quite an early sort of stage to films that we've only sort of supported in the last year.
I mean, there are some really interesting discussions at the moment about sort of greening your stories as well, which I think it's worth filmmakers beginning to think about and consider about how you would, make your characters act in a, authentic way, but one that reflects, sustainability criteria, and there are very kind of basic examples, like they would be having, their reusable coffee cups as they're walking to work. And, there are things like that where we can start, as storytellers, you can start embedding those things in your stories if they're authentic to your stories. So I think that's quite an interesting point of discussion. And like Tom said, you will have to take part in the Albert pre-production calculator and post-production calculator. We've got some useful links about greening your short film on the Southwest Hub website as well. Maybe we could pop those in the chat. I think it's really important for everyone to be thinking about. It's it's one of the burning issues of our times. And in terms of actual applications, I don't think we've had any projects that are specifically tackling climate change or looking at that as a theme or topic. And I would be really interested in receiving those.
Great. David, Carolina, did you have anything to add about how you've been sort of managing that in terms of your shorts at the moment?
Well, I was going to say that it's something that we think about, but I think COVID makes it really difficult at the moment, because we're having to ask. We're filming in Ross and Y, so everyone has to come by train because nobody lives there. But we're trying to encourage people not to travel by train and go by car, because we need to reduce contact in public transport. So I think it is something that I definitely think we need to think about in terms of how we're going to distribute the food, perhaps, but how to. But we have to use masks and gloves and not gloves actually. Sorry, not gloves, but masks and all of these like extra things that you do have to dispose of very quickly after using them. So we're at a moment where we're creating a lot of rubbish, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it is difficult at the moment. It is challenging, yeah, with the COVID precautions that you're being required to take as well.
We had the same experience on ours. So because we're up in Norfolk and we had to come down to London to shoot. So it was, we did carpool. Some of us who were in the same bubble, we came down together. But yeah, otherwise it was quite a lot of people in cars, because we had to keep everybody up to, I think it was like 2 people in a vehicle together, with one in the front seat, one in the back. So it was a bit complicated with COVID. And then in terms of the production itself, I hadn't gone through the calculator or anything for my production, because of when we went through it was back in 2019. I guess that might have been before that was in place. But yeah, I think it was difficult with COVID. It's just kind of doubling down on that comment.
Great. So I think, yeah, it's tough at the moment, isn't it? There's a question here around whether you can apply to early development funding with a project idea. Well, you've got an existing short that you want to turn into a feature, and whether that's something that BFI might support through early development. So you've kind of gone through, made a short, but now you're looking at turning that, or creating a feature version of that short.
Yes. Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, one thing that I kind of, going backwards, try not to encourage people to do is to make a short film, which is basically a kind of pitch for a feature film. This short film still has to be a standalone short film and work as a standalone short in its own right. But yeah, you can, yeah, of course, apply for the early dev fund with it, having had a short film that's similar in the past.
Would be worth just making sure that there's no rights problems with that. The BFI will need to know that you own all necessary IP and rights, and there's no clearances needed. So.
There's a question here just around early development with how much we typically award, and I've seen that's also for the short film fund. I think with early development, it's kind of worth saying that mostly the applications we support tend to be quite small amounts of money. So they may typically take the full writer fee of $1,000, but then quite small amounts of money for those other expenses that we talked about. So typically, I think we award within the Southwest, I would say, between like 2,000 and 3,000 at the very most for those pots of money. So like I say, they aren't necessarily kind of large pots of money. And similarly with the short film fund, we do obviously occasionally fund the full amount, but often as well, I think I worked it out the other day, and we fund, like, on average, I think it's about 11,000 per short. So, typically we do see some that come under, some around 8,000 or less, and then some that come in at the higher end, but it does really vary between those. Just to get that out there. So the question here, Tom and us, I think might be useful just as a kind of closing question around what happens around match funding. So when I say match funding, by the way, and if anyone's kind of a little bit unsure about the terminology, that really just means other funding or additional finance. So let's say your budget is for a short film is 20,000 and you're asking us for 15,000, then that 5,000 would then equate to what is the match funding and what we're expecting. So it's the additional finance that you need to secure to be able to make the film. So they're asking about what happens is, so for example, if they went out and raised the additional money that they need, they're asking whether on occasion we ever kind of, I guess, conflict whatever amount they're asking for. So if they were asking for 10,000, do we ever go back and offer less? And what would happen in that situation if they'd managed to match fund, but then they had a shortfall because BFI were offering less than they sort of originally anticipated the BFI would be able to support. I think that would be an ongoing conversation, but it'd be good to maybe get a sense of experiences we've had with match funding kind of previously, and yeah, kind of the expectations around that.
So yeah, we will sometimes come back with a counter offer. Yeah, if people have come in for a certain amount, and if either our budget can't do that, or if we feel that there's movement in the budget, we would come back with a counter offer. I mean, it would be part of a longer conversation, and that counter offer would be made at a point of a project that we're really interested in supporting. I mean, we wouldn't make a ridiculous counter offer that we felt would not be possible, because that wouldn't sort of be in anyone's interest. So the counteroffer would normally be made, like I said, if we just can't stretch to it and we want to give the team maybe some time to see if they can continue to raise additional finance, or if we think that there is room to kind of maybe scale that budget down or scale that project down, we would maybe have a conversation about that, to see if the team are interested in going on that development process with us based on an offer that we would make.
I just wanted to address as well just a question that's coming through around the sort of diversity or makeup of the funding board in terms of who looks at applications. So I thought maybe it might be useful for us to talk a little bit more about the process of actually assessing applications through both the Short Film Fund and the Early Development Fund. I don't know if Tom or Alice, when you might want to just take that and just kind of explain the different people who are part of that assessment process and how that's made up.
Well, they released, so the kind of new thing which was introduced the latter part of last year was that there are an external assessors that read all the scripts, that write reports, so they form part of the kind of assessment process that we use in supporting our decisions. They announced the list of people recently from a real broad range of people that are working, looking at the assessment. So it's a strong mix of people that are working in that area. Obviously, we're three white people today on this call, but we don't represent all the talent execs who assess all the applications. But yeah, it's a really broad range and diverse range of people that read everything, and it's really important to us that we support a range of diversity within the ideas, but also the filmmakers that we're supporting.
Yeah, definitely. And just to say, I think you can actually access the list of readers that are now part of that assessment process. I'm pretty sure it's on the BFI Network website. Again, maybe we can pop that in the chat, so you can read up all about them. And the way the process works, sort of for transparency, all the projects are assessed by an external reader, and then they're also assessed by the regional hub where that project is based. So everything gets to read once by one of these external readers, and then by the regional hub talent exec.
Yeah, also just to add as well, it does also go to the main board of development execs at BFI as well, who make up the film fund. They make the kind of final green light decision on projects as well, outside of that. Great, I think that's all we've kind of got time for. I know there's so many questions and I'm so sorry we can't get through them all. It's always great to just kind of connect with your local talent exec and kind of find out a bit more about what's kind of going on. I'm just going to pop this last link. So if there's any link you're going to open into your window, I would suggest this one. This is just going to basically link through to all the different hubs that are out there in terms of the BFI network funding. So you can actually kind of connect with whoever it is and pick up any conversation with your local talent exec at this point. But I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight, and also to David and Carolina for being part of this conversation with us this evening. And we hope everyone gets their applications in. We're really looking forward to kind of reading them and being able to see your ideas. And yep, thanks everyone for coming along, and we'll make sure as well that there's a share of this recording that will eventually either go out through the BFI YouTube, or we'll also potentially be sharing that across our kind of southwest and southeast hubs, and we'll make sure that goes out publicly. Brilliant. Thank you so much everyone for coming along.
Good luck everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.